loyalty. Take care, folks.
Welcome to Winning Strategies, Defenders of Capitalism, hosted by nationally recognized merchant banker Tim Connally. Live talk radio that connects you with the titans of business, the men and women who move financial markets. Call now with your questions for Tim toll-free at 1-800-336-2225. That's 1-800-336-2225. Or email him at talk@winningstrategies.net. Now, here's Tim Connally.
And we're back with the second hour of Winning Strategies. We've got Mike King, and I suspect Dr. Jan Vandersandy is on. Jan, how are you?
Hello, Tim. Nice to be with you again.
Well, unfortunately, we're continuing to go through the correction you and I have been discussing for quite a while.
Well, we've been warning everybody about it, so it shouldn't be a surprise to our listeners.
No, it shouldn't. If you've been buying the puts we've been recommending, you're doing okay. And we also have a really valuable show today. Jan, we have live with us in the in-office studios at Corporate Strategies on the campus of the Houstonian in Houston, Texas, we have Don Clark, who is the former special agent in charge of the FBI office in Houston, but he has such an incredible background. He actually began duty with the FBI November 1976. He served in Miami, New York, Washington, L.A., Newark, San Antonio, and finally he got it right and came to Houston. His assignments are all over the criminal map, from foreign counterintelligence, counterterrorism, violent crime, organized crime, which we are particularly going to be talking about today, and of course other FBI investigations. He has seen it all. He supervised the 1979 Iranian hostage crisis when he handled the movement of the Shah of Iran from New York to San Antonio. He has an incredible background in criminal investigations, and we're fortunate to have him on the show. So, Don, thanks for being here today.
Good to be with you, Tim.
And we have Wes Christian. Wes has been on the show many times, and in fact, I checked. Wes and John O'Quinn were on the show together almost 9 years ago. Was the first show we did on naked shorting. Now, what's amazing to me, Wes, is the government of Germany now has their attention on naked shorting. In only 9 years, you've been an overnight success.
Well, it's amazing. Finally, a government has decided to stop allowing people to steal. Pretty basic concept, and I think what we're going to find, Tim, is that a lot of other countries are going to follow. And they should follow, because again, you shouldn't be able to sell something that you never owned and you never deliver, and you take the money from the buyer and the buyer gets nothing. It's called stealing.
You know, it's interesting. Wes provided me with a tremendous amount of information, and I'm not going to go into it myself. Rather, I'm going to have Don and Wes do it, because Don's been involved in these investigations and these trials, and Wes has, and I'm not sure what stuff I can and can't say. But I can say this. This is the most incredible criminal conspiracy I have ever seen. People are, there are transactions that go 8 and 9 times offshore, and people, suddenly you've got players in the Ukraine or something, in Russia, and Russian banks and Russian hedge funds, and the Bahamas, and here and there. And I guess the first thing we'd like to understand is, Don, you've been involved in investigating this for quite a while. How long have you been seeing this kind of activity, and when did you first see it where you knew it wasn't just... Everybody tried to deny this for years, especially the big Wall Street players. I mean, I got the nastiest calls after the first time that John O'Quinn and Wes were on the phone. I got nasty, "You're supporting these crazy people that are trying to destroy our industry," and da-da-da-da. And now I start seeing the facts and go, no wonder they were upset.
Well, you know, Tim, it's a good point, and I have to say that I have to go back with Wes. also, because coming from a criminal background, you know, we look at criminals as somebody with masks on their face, you know, big old guns on their side, and they're going in either to rob a bank or to steal something that doesn't belong to them, any type of real violent types of criminals. And yes, white-collar crime in a sense, but not to the magnitude that we see in the stock fraud arena. And after having a relationship with John O'Quinn, working in his law firm, and a relationship with Wes, it goes back to 2002, you know. I was talking to Wes earlier, and I said, when the heck did we start this, you know, in 2002? And we could have started it earlier, knowing now and knowing even in 2002 what we knew. What we thought is that the mob was not involved in this. We didn't think they were, because the mob had an image that they did. What was it? Truck hijackings, robbings, bank robberies, some of the other crimes. But you know what? The mob, Tim, moved to Wall Street, and they put on suits and ties. They train their kids and their associates that this is the way now that we are going to deal with corrupt activities, and they did a heck of a job with it.
So when, Wes, you started looking so carefully at this years ago with John, and I know these investigations have been ongoing, you've had depositions, I know there's a lot of things you can't talk about, but tell us about more of the egregious things you've discovered, stuff that's a record that can be talked about.
Yeah, some of the most egregious things are the level of the involvement of the activity, the dollars involved, you know, hundreds of millions of dollars, billions of dollars. And the reality is a lot of that, you know, comes from offshore. It's a perfect environment, if you think about it, for money to get washed, okay? Money comes offshore, it comes onshore. It's used to either...
But why don't you describe a typical transaction for our listeners, how that works?
A typical transaction would be where basically a mob sets up its own shop. In this case, let's call it Bryn Mawr, which is actually a name of one of their shops. Incidentally, several people have pled out, are now serving time over this very illegal activity in a company called Eagle Tech, who is a client of ours, and that case was filed in 2002. In that transaction, basically, the mob got in, pumped the stock up by artificially creating buys that really didn't exist. So proposed buyers looked like they were buying stock, but in reality it was a scam. The stock goes up, they then naked short into that with some other broker-dealer firms, and ultimately in the process take the difference between $10 a share ultimately down to pennies a share, times ultimately, you know, tens of millions, if not over 100 million shares in that company.
So they would create false buying to get real retail investors into the stock.
True.
They kind of suck them in and make it look like there was this upward trend in the stock.
Exactly. And then how they would pay off everybody, which was most interesting, you talk about enlightening me and Don, is they would use these offshore credit cards, and these credit cards would be issued to some LLC in Cayman or Bahamas or Bermuda. And basically it had the same, each person had the same card, but each card had a fixed amount of money on it, and each card had its own code. And so the people that were actually helping do this were in New York, but they were getting paid through a bank in the Bahamas, and they would send people around daily to go to ATMs and take out cash, and in doing so take out $5,000, $10,000, which amounted to ultimately millions of dollars a year to the brokers that were being bribed that were in on this piece of the transaction with the mob.
Now, has the IRS investigated this too?
They are, and what you're going to find is the IRS is all over this issue, as the whole administration is presently, as you're aware, about these offshore accounts. And so ultimately I think a lot of this is going to get uncovered that way too. But from our perspective, it's just another example of how, as one gentleman said in a deposition, who sadly turned state's evidence for us, but unfortunately has now died of cancer, as he said, Wall Street just went from, the mob went from concrete to Wall Street. He said, you make a lot more money in Wall Street than you do in concrete, which I thought was the profound statement.
You know, Don, when you started seeing this evidence, What gave you a sense of the magnitude of it? What got you to see this is way bigger than a penny stock scam?
Well, you know, when I started seeing the evidence that was out there, the biggest problem was trying to sell that to other people who were involved with our team, because the magnitude of it was so huge, Tim, that it was difficult to get the people who had done normal law enforcement, if you will, the regular crimes that they